Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content explores the historical evolution of American television narratives and the sociological shifts regarding interpersonal relationships and family structures. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute psychological, legal, or professional relationship counseling. Historical trends and media analysis are not predictive of individual outcomes, and viewers should conduct their own due diligence when interpreting media influence on modern society. In 1954, a staggering 70% of all American households with a television set were tuned in to a single episode of I Love Lucy. At that moment, the entire nation was synchronized, absorbing a very specific, curated image of the American dream. A suburban home, a working husband, a mischievous but devoted wife, and a domestic bond that was, by the laws of the Federal Communications Commission and the cultural mores of the time, unbreakable. But fast forward to the modern era, and the most discussed television events of the decade aren't about the formation of the family, but its spectacular high-definition deconstruction. We have moved from the era of the honeymooners to the era of Succession and Marriage Story. Today, the divorce narrative isn't just a plot point. It is a billion-dollar genre. We are living through a cultural pivot where the dissolution of the happily ever after has become more profitable and more relatable than the union itself. This raises a haunting question. Did our screens reflect a changing America? Or did the narrative of the divorce now culture actually teach us how to walk away? Today, we are launching a 10-part masterclass on the architecture of the American domestic narrative. For the modern viewer, understanding this isn't just about media literacy. It is about recognizing the invisible forces that shape your own expectations of happiness, loyalty, and personal autonomy. By the end of this deep dive, you will understand how the shift from broadcast to narrowcast changed the way we value long-term commitment, and why the divorce now narrative is currently the most powerful psychological tool in the entertainment industry. To understand where we are, we must examine the consensus era of the 1950s and 60s. During this period, television functioned as a form of social glue. Shows like Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver were not just sitcoms, they were instructional manuals for a post-World War II middle class. The nuclear family was a geopolitical asset during the Cold War, representing American stability against the perceived chaos of the outside world. In this landscape, divorce was a non-entity. It wasn't just that it didn't happen on screen, it was effectively censored. The Hays Code and later internal network standards ensured that any threat to the sanctity of the home was treated as a villainous intrusion or a tragic mistake that was rectified by the 30-minute mark. However, the 1970s introduced a seismic shift, known as the relevant sitcom. Producers like Norman Lear began to realize that the consensus era was dying. The American public was dealing with the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and the burgeoning feminist movement. In 1973, a landmark documentary series titled An American Family aired on PBS. This was the first true reality show, following the Loud family. To the shock of the nation, the parents, Bill and Pat Loud, decided to separate on camera. This was a case study in the breakdown of the suburban facade. It was the first time millions of Americans saw a real-life divorce play out in their living rooms, and the ratings were astronomical. This proved a vital historical trend. Conflict within the family was more engaging than harmony. As we moved into the 1980s and 90s, the divorce now narrative began to evolve into a tool for character growth and empowerment. Think of the pilot episode of Friends. It begins with Rachel Green fleeing her wedding, a symbolic rejection of the traditional domestic path. Throughout the 90s, television began to frame the end of a marriage not as a failure, but as a rebranding of the self. Shows like Murphy Brown or Roseanne showcased the complexities of single parenthood and the economic realities of split households. The narrative shifted from, how do we save the marriage, to, how do I find myself after the marriage? This was a crucial psychological pivot for the U.S. audience. It reflected the rising divorce rates of the late 20th century, but it also normalized the idea that personal fulfillment was a higher virtue than institutional longevity. In the 21st century, the rise of prestige TV on platforms like HBO, Showtime, and eventually Netflix, took this narrative to a granular level. We entered the era of the unhappy elite. Shows like The Sopranos or Mad Men deconstructed the suburban dream with surgical precision. They didn't just show divorce. They showed the slow, agonizing decay of intimacy over years of infidelity and silence. Don Draper wasn't just a character. He was a symbol of the emptiness behind the 1950s advertising image. This period taught viewers to look for the rot, in every perfect picture. The divorce now narrative became synonymous with truth and authenticity. If a show ended with a happy couple, it was seen as commercial or fake. If it ended with a dramatic legal battle and a broken home, it was seen as art. We must also consider the economic drivers behind these stories. In the modern streaming wars, engagement is driven by high-stakes emotional volatility. Data suggests that breakup content generates higher social media sentiment and longer watch times than traditional romantic comedies. The Divorce Now narrative allows for a multi-season arc of conflict: the discovery, the legal battle, the custody dispute, and the eventual rebirth of the protagonist. From a scriptwriting perspective, a happy marriage is a narrative dead end. A divorce is a goldmine of potential outcomes and plot twists. This brings us to the current narrative of the now. We are seeing a surge in content that focuses on conscious uncoupling, or the clean break. Shows are increasingly focusing on the logistics of the split, the mediation, the apps used for co-parenting, the division of assets. This is the masterclass phase of television history, where the media is literally teaching the audience the step-by-step process of dismantling a life. It is no longer a tragedy, it is a transition. But what is the cost of this saturation? When every prestige story we consume tells us that long-term commitment is a trap or a lie, it inevitably reshapes the cultural psyche. We are moving toward a disposable narrative, where the value of a relationship is measured only by its current utility to the individual's arc. Throughout this series, we will break down the specific tropes used by writers to make divorce look like the ultimate form of self-care. We will look at the gray divorce trend on screen, the toxic masculinity trope as a catalyst for narrative splits, and how the financial independence arc for female leads has become the standard blueprint for modern drama. By analyzing these historical trends, we can see that television did not just record the history of the American family, it actively participated in its deconstruction. Every time you watch a protagonist find their voice by leaving a 20-year marriage in the season finale, you are witnessing the culmination of 70 years of narrative engineering. This is the Divorce Now culture, and to navigate it, we have to understand the script. Over the next 9 parts of this deep dive, we will examine the specific case studies of shows that changed the laws of the land, the economic impact of the single consumer demographic on TV advertising, and the future of the American family in a digital-first, narrative-driven world. We are moving beyond the surface level to see the gears of the industry that decided that happily ever after was bad for business. To truly understand how we transitioned from the sacred bond of the 1950s to the modern Divorce Now narrative, we have to look at the cold, hard mechanics of the attention economy. In 2026, we see this clearly. Domestic harmony does not trend. Peace does not generate clicks. If we look at the historical trends of network television from the 1950s through the late 1970s, we see a deliberate architectural shift in how conflict was staged. In the early days, conflict was external. The family was a fortress, and the threats were outside the gates. A nosy neighbor, a financial hurdle, or a misunderstanding at work. But as the 1970s rolled in, the industry realized that the most sustainable source of drama wasn't the external world. It was the person sitting across from you at the dinner table. Imagine if you were a network executive in 1972. You are watching the ratings for traditional variety shows plummet while a raw, uncomfortable documentary, like An American Family, captivates the nation. You realize that the American public is no longer satisfied with the illusion of perfection. They want to see the cracks. This led to the birth of the fractured family sitcom, where the narrative began to prioritize individual liberation over collective stability. One of the most significant case studies from this era is the show Maude. A spin-off of All in the Family, Maude didn't just push boundaries, it shattered them. It presented a protagonist who was on her 4th marriage. For the first time, a lead character's history of divorce wasn't treated as a tragic backstory or a character flaw, but as a badge of experience and independence. This shift was not accidental. It was a response to the changing legal landscape of the United States. In 1969, California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce law. Prior to this, someone had to be proven at fault: adultery, abandonment, or cruelty. Once the legal barrier dropped, the narrative barrier on television followed suit. Television writers began to explore the potential outcomes of a society where leaving was just as valid an option as staying. We started to see a step-by-step deconstruction of the stay-for-the-kids mentality. By the time we reached the 1980s, shows like One Day at a Time were centering the entire premise on a divorced mother raising 2 daughters. The divorce wasn't the end of the story. It was the inciting incident that allowed the story to begin. Let's look at the data of human psychology that writers use to keep you hooked. There is a concept known as the Zeigarnik effect, which suggests that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. In television narrative, a happy marriage is a completed task. It is a closed loop. A divorce, however, is a massive multi-year open loop. It introduces legal tension, financial instability, and emotional volatility. For a writer in 2026, why would you write a script about a couple successfully communicating through a problem when you can write a script about the explosive fallout of a secret bank account or a hidden affair? The latter provides 20 episodes of high-retention content, while the former is a single boring scene. Take the case study of the 1980s hit Moonlighting. The entire show was built on the will they or won't they tension between Maddie Hayes and David Addison. The moment they finally got together, the ratings cratered. This taught the industry a brutal lesson. The pursuit of the union is interesting, but the maintenance of the union is a ratings killer. To keep the engine running, you must introduce the threat of the break. This evolved into what we now see in modern prestige dramas like The Affair or Scenes from a Marriage. These shows are essentially masterclasses in the anatomy of a breakup. They use a non-linear narrative to show you the peak of the love and the nadir of the divorce simultaneously, creating a jarring contrast that keeps the viewer in a state of constant emotional unrest. Consider the character of a modern-day viewer in 2026. Let's call him Mark. Mark grew up watching sitcoms where the parents might bicker but never leave. Now Mark watches streaming services where the most celebrated protagonists are those who blow up their lives to find themselves. This is the empowerment narrative of the 21st century. Television has rebranded the end of a relationship as the beginning of an identity. In the deep dive of scriptwriting, this is known as the Phoenix Arc. The old life must burn so the new, more authentic self can rise. But what the scripts often gloss over are the granular long-term case studies of the collateral damage. They focus on the dramatic door-slamming moment because that is what goes viral. In the mid-2000s, we saw the rise of the Desperate Housewives era. This took the suburban perfection of the 1950s and turned it into a gothic horror show. Divorce became a weapon, a plot twist, and a primary source of humor. The show normalized the idea that every marriage in the cul-de-sac was a ticking time bomb. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a psychological conditioning of the audience to expect failure. When we expect failure, we find it easier to accept when it appears in our own lives or the lives of those around us. The potential outcomes of this narrative saturation are profound. We have moved from a culture that viewed divorce as a social failure to a culture that views it as a necessary, even trendy rite of passage. The step-by-step evolution of this narrative reached a fever pitch with the arrival of reality television franchises like The Real Housewives. Here, the Divorce Now narrative became a literal career move. Cast members often saw their social media following and marketability increase after a highly publicized split. The narrative moved from the script to the spreadsheet. Divorce became profitable. In 2026, we see the remnants of this in how influencers and celebrities manage their personal brands. The breakup announcement is a carefully curated piece of content designed for maximum engagement. But why does this narrative specifically thrive in the United States? It is because it aligns with the American mythos of the self-made individual. We love stories of people who pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and the divorce narrative is essentially a domestic version of that. It's about the rugged individualist shedding the weight of a partner who is holding them back. It fits the consumerist model perfectly. If something is broken, or even just slightly out of date, you don't fix it, you replace it. We have to ask ourselves, are these shows merely reflecting the 50% divorce rate in America? Or are they one of the primary drivers of it? By providing a constant stream of examples where the characters are happier, wealthier, and more vibrant after their divorce, television provides a false sense of security about the process. It skips the 3 years of grueling litigation and the decade of psychological recovery for the children, and cuts straight to the montage of the protagonist in a new apartment with a glass of wine. As we move into part 3, we are going to look at the specific financial incentives that networks have for promoting the single life. There is a hidden economic reality to the Divorce Now narrative that involves the way advertising is sold to single-person households versus families. The industry realized that one person living alone consumes more than two people living together. But before we get into the money, we have to look at the most dangerous trope of all, the one that convinced millions of Americans that their spouse was actually their greatest enemy. What happens when the person you've spent 10 years with becomes the villain of your own personal movie? The transformation of a spouse into a cinematic antagonist is perhaps the most calculated narrative shift in the history of American television. To understand this, we have to look at the mechanical requirements of a long-running television series. In a vacuum, a stable marriage is the death of plot. Narrative requires friction, and the ultimate friction in a domestic setting is the betrayal of the person you trust most. By the time we reached the mid-2020s, this trope had become so refined that writers began using a specific technique called the retrospective villainization of the partner. This is where a character who was portrayed as supportive and loving for several seasons is suddenly revealed, through a series of flashbacks or a sudden personality shift, to be a covert narcissist or an emotional anchor dragging the protagonist down. Imagine if you are a viewer named Sarah in 2026. You have been married for 12 years. You sit down to watch a prestige drama where the female lead, who looks just like you, suddenly realizes her husband's preference for staying in on Friday nights isn't just a personality trait. It is portrayed as a systematic attempt to isolate her and crush her spirit. The show uses moody lighting, minor key music, and tight close-ups to frame his request for dinner as a demand for subservience. This isn't just storytelling. It is a psychological reframing. Television has mastered the art of taking the mundane compromises of a long-term relationship and recasting them as red flags. Historically, this trend gained significant traction in the early 2000s with the rise of the anti-hero era. Shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad began to play with the idea of the wife as the obstacle to the protagonist's interesting life. Skylar White in Breaking Bad is a quintessential case study. From a narrative standpoint, she was the voice of reason, the person trying to keep the family safe from a drug-dealing husband. Yet, because the audience was conditioned to root for the protagonist's agency, she became one of the most hated characters in television history. The narrative taught millions of viewers that the person trying to maintain the family structure was the enemy of progress. This paved the way for the modern divorce now narrative, where the act of leaving is framed as the ultimate act of heroism. The step-by-step process of this villainization usually follows a predictable scriptwriting blueprint. Step 1 is the introduction of the stifled protagonist. They are shown in a montage of domestic drudgery, doing laundry, checking bank statements, or staring blankly at a partner who is snoring. Step 2 is the catalyst, often an external character or a forgotten hobby that reminds the protagonist of who they used to be. Step 3 is the escalation of the spouse's flaws. Every minor disagreement is elevated to a fundamental compatibility crisis. By the time the divorce papers are served in the season finale, the audience is cheering for the destruction of a home because the writers have successfully convinced them that the marriage was a prison. We have to look at the data regarding the economic incentives of this shift. In the 1950s, advertisers targeted the household as a single unit. They sold station wagons, family-sized detergents, and appliances meant for a collective. However, as we moved into the 2020s, the consumer landscape changed. Marketing data began to show that single-person households are significantly more profitable than family units on a per capita basis. A divorced couple now requires 2 apartments, 2 sets of furniture, 2 internet subscriptions, and 2 separate streaming accounts. The Divorce Now narrative isn't just a creative choice. It is a narrative that supports the highest levels of consumerism. Television shows that celebrate the single life or the post-divorce glow-up are perfectly aligned with the interests of advertisers who want to reach autonomous individuals with 100% control over their discretionary spending. Take the case study of Sex and the City and its subsequent revivals. The show was a revolution in product placement. It didn't just sell a lifestyle. It sold the idea that the most important relationship a person can have is with their brand of shoes and their circle of friends, not a domestic partner. When the narrative occasionally veered into marriage, it often framed it as a series of compromises that diluted the protagonist's brand. This created a powerful historical trend where the American public began to view the self as a project that must be optimized, and a spouse as a potential liability to that optimization. In 2026, we see this play out in the hyper-niche world of algorithmic content. If you watch a show about a dramatic divorce, your streaming service will suggest 3 more. Your social media feed will begin to populate with clips of those shows, often edited with aggressive captions about knowing your worth and walking away. This creates a feedback loop where the narrative of the now becomes the only narrative you see. The step-by-step psychological impact of this is the erosion of the concept of the long haul. If every story you consume suggests that there is a better, more exciting version of you waiting on the other side of a breakup, the threshold for staying in a difficult marriage drops significantly. Let's examine the role of legal dramas in this evolution. For decades, shows like Law and Order or The Good Wife have used the divorce court as a theater of war. These shows provide a granular look at the potential outcomes of a split, but they often focus on the tactical victory. They show the clever lawyer who uncovers the hidden offshore account, or the dramatic testimony that wins full custody. They rarely show the quiet, devastating reality of a child crying in a hallway because they forgot which house they are supposed to be at on a Tuesday. By gamifying the divorce process, television has made the dissolution of a marriage look like a high-stakes competition that can be won. Imagine a scenario where a character named John, influenced by these narratives, views his upcoming mediation not as a sad necessity, but as a chance to get a win. He adopts the aggressive posture of the lawyers he sees on screen. This is the imitation effect. Life begins to mimic the heightened drama of the screen because the screen is our primary source of social modeling. The Divorce Now narrative provides the script for how to act when things get tough. It tells you that you are the main character, and everyone else is just a supporting cast member in your journey towards self-actualization. Even the way we film these stories has changed. In the 1970s, family scenes were often shot in wide angles, showing the whole group in the frame together. This emphasized the unit. Today, directors use extremely shallow depths of field, blurring out the partner in the background while the protagonist's face is in sharp focus. This visual language reinforces the idea that the individual's internal experience is the only thing that matters. The partner is literally becoming a blur in the eyes of the audience. But what happens when the narrative of empowerment hits the wall of reality? In the next part, we are going to dive into the massive gap between the television divorce and the actual data of the American legal and financial system. We will look at how the industry hides the poverty trap that often follows the Divorce Now narrative, especially for women, and how the glamorous single mom trope on screen is one of the most statistically inaccurate portrayals in media history. The screen shows you the liberation, but it hides the ledger. What are the networks not telling you about the cost of the split, and why is the truth considered a ratings killer? The answers lie in the secret contracts between production houses and the luxury brands that fund your favorite dramas. To understand why the truth about divorce is considered a ratings killer, we have to look at the intersection of aesthetic aspiration and corporate sponsorship. In the year 2026, the gap between the television divorce and the reality of the American legal and financial system has never been wider. On your screen, divorce is a glamorous shedding of skin. In reality, it is a brutal audit of every mistake you have ever made. The reason television refuses to show the actual ledger of a divorce is simple. The brands that buy commercial time or pay for product placement are selling a dream of infinite upward mobility. They are not interested in the historical trends of downward mobility that often follow the dissolution of a multi-income household. Imagine if you are a character named David. On television, when David leaves his wife, he moves into a sleek, industrial loft in a trendy part of the city. He suddenly has a wardrobe of custom-fitted suits and a refrigerator stocked with high-end artisanal beverages. This is the aesthetic of liberation. In reality, a middle-class man like David would likely be looking at a significant reduction in his standard of living. He would be dealing with the division of a 401k, the potential sale of the family home in a high-interest rate market, and the crushing reality of child support or alimony. But showing David eating lukewarm soup in a cramped one-bedroom apartment doesn't sell luxury watches or high-performance SUVs. Therefore, the media creates a fantasy where the act of walking away magically unlocks a higher tier of consumption. A critical case study in this phenomenon is the rise of the luxury divorce genre on networks like Bravo and various streaming platforms. These shows follow high-net-worth individuals as they navigate separations involving yachts, multi-million-dollar estates, and private jets. By focusing on the top 0.1% of earners, these narratives convince the average viewer that a split is a high-stakes chess match for riches, rather than a desperate scramble to maintain a basic lifestyle. This creates a distorted perception of potential outcomes. Viewers begin to subconsciously associate the end of a marriage with an influx of new opportunities and wealth, rather than the statistical reality of wealth fragmentation. Let us look at the step-by-step financial deconstruction that television ignores. Step 1. The initial retainer. In a real-world American scenario, a contested divorce can cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees before a single person ever steps foot in a courtroom. On television, lawyers are often portrayed as witty confidants who work for the thrill of the win. They rarely show the protagonist staring at a bill for 6 minutes of phone time. Step 2. The lifestyle audit. In states with community property or equitable distribution laws, The process of dividing assets is a tedious, months-long forensic nightmare. Television skips this entirely, moving straight to the scene where the protagonist gets the house and the jewelry. Step 3. The long-term impact on retirement and insurance. These are the boring, uncinematic pillars of a stable life that are systematically removed from the divorce now narrative because they complicate the message of total freedom. The portrayal of the single mother on television is perhaps the most egregious example of this narrative manipulation. Since the 1990s, we have seen a historical trend of the single mom as a superhero. While this was intended to be empowering, it inadvertently created a false narrative of ease. Characters like those in Gilmore Girls or more modern iterations like Big Little Lies present single motherhood as a lifestyle choice supported by an invisible safety net of family wealth or high-powered careers. They rarely address the data from the U.S. Census Bureau, which consistently shows that households headed by single mothers are among the most economically vulnerable in the country. By erasing the struggle of the grocery budget or the panic of a missed car payment, television frames the divorce now choice as one without significant financial risk. There is also the hidden role of the production luxury complex. Production houses often sign contracts with fashion houses and interior design firms to furnish their sets. If a character is going through a divorce, the set design for their new single life must be enticing. It has to make the viewer want that life. This is why the post-divorce apartment on a TV show often looks better than the family home. The lighting is warmer, the furniture is more modern, and the clutter of children's toys is magically replaced by high-end art. This is a deliberate psychological nudge. It tells the viewer that their current domestic environment is the source of their unhappiness, and a new curated space is the solution. In the United States public's eye, the year 2026 has become a period where the individual is treated as a brand that must be protected at all costs. If a marriage is damaging the brand, the narrative dictates an immediate exit, but the industry fails to show the case studies of the social capital lost during a split. In real life, a divorce often means the fracturing of a social circle, the loss of in-law relationships that may have spanned decades, and the isolation of the individual. On screen, the protagonist always has a perfectly supportive group of friends who are ready to take them out for cocktails the night the papers are signed. This ignores the reality of the social contagion of divorce, where the split of one couple often puts immense pressure on their entire friend group. The pacing of these narratives is also designed to deceive. A television season might cover a year of life in 10 hours of screen time. The most painful parts of a divorce, the long nights of silence, the awkward exchanges of children in a grocery store parking lot, the years of court dates are compressed into a 3-minute montage. This gives the viewer a false sense of the duration of the trauma. It makes the divorce now option look like a quick, sharp pain followed by a lifetime of bliss. In reality, the recovery period for a major domestic dissolution is often measured in half-decades, not half-hours. Furthermore, we must examine the impact of the no-fault era on the way characters are written today. Because legal fault is no longer required, writers have had to invent emotional fault to justify the split to the audience. This has led to the hyperpathologizing of normal relationship friction. In the scripts of 2026, a husband who forgets an anniversary isn't just forgetful. He is displaying signs of emotional neglect. A wife who wants to spend more time with her friends isn't just seeking social balance. She is a victim of a restrictive domestic patriarch. By raising the stakes of every minor conflict, the media makes the divorce now narrative feel like the only logical conclusion for anyone who values their mental health. This masterclass is designed to pull back the curtain on these techniques. We are seeing a historical trend where the media serves as a giant centrifuge, spinning families apart because the individual pieces are easier to sell things to. When you are part of a stable, contented unit, you are a difficult target for advertisers. You have a built-in support system, a shared economy, and a long-term perspective. When you are a newly single, slightly traumatized individual looking to rebuild your identity, you are the perfect consumer. You are looking for a new car, a new wardrobe, a new dating app subscription, and a new life. But what happens when the narrative of liberation starts to target the next generation? We have seen how television teaches adults to leave, but how does it teach children to cope? In the next part, we are going to look at the evolution of the child of divorce trope. We will explore how television has moved from portraying the broken home as a tragedy to portraying it as a sophisticated, modern arrangement that makes children more resilient. Is this a helpful shift in perspective? Or is it another layer of the industry's attempt to justify the profitable destruction of the family unit? We will look at the data of the multi-generational impact of these stories and why the child's perspective is the most manipulated part of the entire Divorce Now script. The manipulation of the child's perspective in the American Divorce Now narrative is a masterclass in narrative sanitization. To maintain the momentum of the liberation story for the adult protagonist, television writers must solve a primary problem: the collateral damage. Historically, the child of divorce was portrayed as a tragic figure, a source of guilt that kept the parents together. But as we move through 2026, the historical trends show a radical reimagining. The modern script has transitioned the child from a victim of a broken home to a sophisticated participant in a new fluid family dynamic. This is the resilient child trope, and it is essential for the industry to keep the Divorce Now narrative palatable for a mass audience. Imagine if you are a character named Michael. In a 1950s drama, if Michael's parents separated, the narrative would focus on his regression, his failing grades, and his eventual delinquency. The weight of the world would be on his shoulders. But in the 2026 version of this story, Michael is portrayed as an emotionally intelligent preteen who sits his parents down and tells them that he just wants them to be happy. He is written as a miniature therapist, possessing a level of psychological depth that few real-world children can sustain. This narrative shift serves a very specific purpose. It relieves the adult audience of the burden of guilt. If the child is okay, then the divorce is not just acceptable, it is a healthy evolution for everyone involved. A significant case study in this evolution can be found in the shift from 1970s films like Kramer vs. Kramer to modern series like Modern Family or Transparent. In Kramer vs. Kramer, the child's distress was the central tension, a raw and uncomfortable reminder of the cost of adult ambition. Fast forward to the sitcom era of the 2010s and 2020s, and we see the birth of the blended family as a comedic goldmine. Shows like Modern Family presented a world where the ex-husband, the new wife, and the children from multiple marriages all lived in a state of harmonious high-definition banter. This created a powerful cultural expectation that a split could be handled with a series of witty one-liners and a shared Google Calendar. The step-by-step deconstruction of the child's trauma in scripts follows a very specific pattern. Step 1. The announcement. In the modern script, this is usually shot with soft lighting and focuses on the parent's bravery. The child's initial shock is briefly shown but quickly replaced by a sense of curiosity. Step 2. The two-household lifestyle. Television frames this as a perk. The child now has 2 bedrooms, 2 sets of toys, and 2 different vacation schedules. The narrative highlights the material gain, rather than the psychological fragmentation. Step 3. The introduction of the new partner. In the Divorce Now narrative, the step-parent is rarely the villain of fairy tales. They are often portrayed as a cool, younger mentor figure who adds value to the child's life, further justifying the initial split. However, when we look at the data from long-term sociological case studies in the United States, a different picture emerges. Historical trends in developmental psychology suggest that the stability of the home environment is a primary predictor of long-term emotional outcomes. Television, by its nature, cannot capture the decade-long ripple effects of a broken home. It cannot show the child at age 25 struggling with commitment because their primary model for a relationship was one that dissolved. The medium is designed for immediate gratification and resolution, which is the antithesis of the reality of family life. This leads us to the concept of the narrative of resilience. In 2026, the entertainment industry has leaned heavily into the idea that trauma makes you stronger. By framing the divorce as a formative challenge that the child overcomes, the media turns a loss into a character-building exercise. This is a brilliant narrative move because it allows the writers to have their cake and eat it too. They can show the high-stakes drama of the breakup while maintaining an optimistic tone. But for the US public, this creates a dangerous disconnect. If a parent sees a child on screen thriving in the wake of a split, they may use that fictional case study to minimize the very real distress of their own children. Consider the role of the teen drama in this landscape. Shows like Euphoria or The OC often feature parents who are either absent, embroiled in scandals, or perpetually in the process of leaving one another. In these stories, the children are forced into premature adulthood. They are shown as hypersexualized, world-weary, and cynical. While this is often marketed as edgy or realistic, it is actually a byproduct of the Divorce Now narrative. When the family structure is removed, the children must become their own anchors. The media glamorizes this independence, calling it finding your own path, but it ignores the underlying instability that necessitates that path. There is also a hidden financial component to how children are portrayed in these scripts. Advertisers who target the youth demographic have a vested interest in the concept of the autonomous child. A child who navigates two different households is a child who often has more influence over purchasing decisions. They may have two separate sets of requests for holiday gifts, two different styles of clothing for each parent's house, and a greater reliance on digital devices to stay connected. The fragmented family creates more consumer touchpoints. When the narrative promotes the two-home lifestyle as a sophisticated arrangement, it indirectly supports the market for doubled consumer goods. In 2026, we must also look at the rise of the co-parenting app as a plot device. Television shows now frequently feature characters using technology to manage their fractured lives. This serves to rationalize the divorce now narrative by making it look organized and manageable. If there is an app for it, it can't be that chaotic, right? The script ignores the fact that these digital tools are often used to avoid direct human contact, further isolating the individuals within the family unit. The technology is presented as a solution, but it is often just a bandage for the loss of the daily, informal interactions that build a family's culture. The step-by-step normalization of the split extends to the educational system as well. Television shows centered on school life now treat the non-traditional family as the default. While this is inclusive of many realities, it also removes the narrative incentive to work through domestic difficulties. If no one on screen is trying to save a marriage for the sake of the children, the very idea of doing so begins to feel antiquated or even harmful. The media has successfully rebranded the sacrifice of the self for the collective as a form of toxic martyrdom. But where does this leave the actual future of American society? If we have successfully coached an entire generation of viewers to believe that leaving is the only way to grow, and that children are merely resilient passengers in the journey of adult self-actualization, what happens to the social fabric? The potential outcomes are starting to manifest in the declining marriage rates and the increasing delay of family formation among younger Americans. They have seen the Divorce Now script play out thousands of times, and many are choosing not to start the movie at all. This brings us to the most complex part of our deep dive. We have seen how the media sells the divorce, how it villainizes the partner, and how it sanitizes the impact on children. But we haven't yet discussed the final frontier: the industry itself. How do the people who write these scripts live? What are the internal memos at the major networks saying about the family value versus individual value debate? In the next part, we are going to look at the corporate architecture of the breakup. We will reveal how the consolidation of media companies has directly influenced the types of families you see on screen, and why the independent single is the most profitable demographic in the history of global capitalism. The split isn't just happening in your living room. It was planned in the boardroom. How deep does the financial incentive go? And who is really profiting when a house is divided? To understand the corporate architecture of the breakup, we have to look at the boardroom logistics of the major media conglomerates that dominate the American landscape in 2026. These entities do not view a television show merely as a story. They view it as a delivery system for a specific demographic profile. For decades, the gold standard for advertisers was the 18 to 49 age bracket, but within that bracket, a massive shift has occurred. The married household, once the bedrock of the consumer economy, has been replaced by the high-velocity single consumer. When a media company develops a show centered on the Divorce Now narrative, they are not just reflecting a social reality. They are optimizing for a market reality where the individual is the primary economic unit. Imagine a character named Jennifer. In 1960, Jennifer's purchasing power was largely tied to her husband's income and the needs of a collective household. One television set, one brand of toothpaste, one station wagon. In the 2026 media landscape, if the narrative of a show encourages Jennifer to transition into the single market, her economic footprint doubles. From the perspective of a corporate strategist, Jennifer as a single woman is a more aggressive consumer. She is more likely to spend on personal care, solo travel, high-end convenience foods, and subscription-based lifestyle services. The boardroom incentive is clear. Narratives that promote the autonomy of the individual over the maintenance of the collective are narratives that drive the sale of more units across more categories. A profound case study in this corporate shift can be found in the historical trends of advertising during primetime dramas. If you look at the 1980s, the commercials surrounding a family drama like Dallas or Dynasty still leaned heavily into family-oriented products. But as we moved into the era of the modern streaming giant, the data began to favor the independent spender. Corporate conglomerates realize that a person undergoing a major life transition, such as a divorce, is in a state of high brand volatility. This is a period where old habits are broken and new loyalty is up for grabs. By flooding the airwaves with stories that normalize and even celebrate the divorce now mindset, media companies are essentially priming the pump for a surge in consumer spending. The step-by-step logic of the corporate-driven script follows a cold financial trajectory. Step 1. Identify the pain points of the modern viewer. Media research departments use big data to track the frustrations of the American public: work-life balance, domestic inequity, and the feeling of being trapped in routine. Step 2. Greenlight content that offers the divorce now solution as the primary method of resolving those pain points. Step 3. Ensure the production design showcases a lifestyle that is only attainable through individual autonomy. When you see a protagonist on a streaming show leave a marriage, suddenly have the time and resources for a transformative fitness journey and a new luxury wardrobe, you are seeing a multi-million-dollar advertisement for the single life. Let us examine the role of data-driven narrative engineering. In 2026, streaming algorithms don't just suggest what you want to watch, they influence what gets produced. If the data shows that viewers in high-income zip codes are engaging with content that features marital deconstruction and individual reinvention, the studios will produce more of it. This creates a feedback loop where the corporate interest in selling to single, high disposable income individuals dictates the moral and social direction of the stories we tell. The historical trends show that as media consolidation increased, the diversity of family structures on screen ironically decreased, settling on a standardized model of the empowered, single individual as the ultimate aspirational figure. We must also look at the case studies of the single consumer demographic. In the United States, the rise of the solo household has been one of the most significant shifts in the last 50 years. According to historical trends, single-person households are the fastest-growing segment of the population. For a media conglomerate, this demographic is a dream. They are more likely to eat out, more likely to use gig economy services, and more likely to invest in self-improvement products. The divorce now narrative is the cultural engine that powers this demographic. By framing the end of a marriage as a necessary step for personal growth, the media is effectively manufacturing its own most profitable customer. Consider the character of a corporate executive we will call Robert. Robert's job is to maximize shareholder value for a global entertainment brand. When Robert looks at a script about a couple working through 20 years of marriage, he sees a story with limited product placement opportunities. When he looks at a script about a messy divorce followed by a series of high-energy dates and a career pivot, he sees a goldmine. He sees opportunities to feature smartphone apps, luxury fashion, modern automotive tech, and high-end real estate. The corporate architecture of the breakup is built on the fact that a fractured life requires more products to put back together than a stable one. Furthermore, the legal and professional services industry has found a symbiotic relationship with these narratives. While television shows often gloss over the boring parts of the law, they highlight the drama of the litigation. This creates a cultural awareness of divorce as a high-end service product. In 2026, we see this through the integration of legal tech and financial planning brands within the ecosystem of lifestyle content. The narrative teaches the viewer that the solution to their domestic unhappiness is a suite of professional services that are readily available for a fee. It turns a social and emotional issue into a commercial transaction. The pacing of this corporate narrative is designed to maintain a state of perpetual aspiration. If a show were to end with a successful reconciliation, the story is over. If it ends with a divorce, the story is just beginning. There is the new dating life, the new career, the new conflict with the ex-spouse. From a corporate longevity perspective, the Divorce Now narrative provides infinite sequels. It creates a brand of character that can be pivoted into any number of consumer-friendly scenarios. This is why we see so few long-term, happy marriages on television today. They are simply not a sustainable business model in the age of fractionalized attention and high-churn subscriptions. We have to ask ourselves, what are the potential outcomes of a society where the most powerful stories are those that profit from the dissolution of our most basic social unit? We are seeing a historical trend where the concept of loyalty is being replaced by the concept of the short-term contract. This is not just happening in our relationships. It is happening in our jobs, our politics, and our communities. The television screen is the training ground for this new fluid reality. It teaches us that everything is replaceable, and that the only thing worth investing in is the individual brand of the self. But as we look deeper into the year 2026, we find that there is another layer to this narrative. It isn't just about the money. It is about the way the media uses the divorce now narrative to redefine the concept of truth itself. We have moved into an era where feeling is more important than fact, and where your truth is the only truth that matters. How did we get to a place where the subjective experience of the individual can override the objective commitments of a lifetime? In the next part, we are going to explore the rise of the subjective reality. We will look at how the language of therapy was weaponized by television writers to create a world where no one is ever wrong for leaving, and where the only sin is staying when you no longer feel like it. How did I feel become the most dangerous phrase in the American script? The phrase "how I feel" has undergone a radical transformation, moving from a private internal state to a supreme legal and moral authority within the American script. In the year 2026, we are witnessing the peak of what sociologists call the therapeutic narrative. This is a framework where the primary goal of life is not the fulfillment of duty, the raising of a family, or the contribution to a community, but the maintenance of a positive internal emotional state. Television has been the primary engine for this shift, systematically replacing the language of commitment with the language of clinical psychology. This shift has created a historical trend where feelings are treated as immutable facts, and any relationship that interferes with a protagonist's emotional trajectory is framed as an obstacle to be removed. Imagine a character named Emily. In a 1940s radio drama, if Emily felt unfulfilled in her marriage, the narrative would likely focus on her finding strength through sacrifice or rediscovering love through shared trials. Fast forward to a prestige streaming series in 2026, and Emily's lack of fulfillment is treated as a medical emergency. The script utilizes therapy speak to validate her decision to leave, using terms like emotional labor, holding space, and self-actualization. This isn't just a change in vocabulary. It is a change in the fundamental contract of human relationships. In the modern script, a marriage is no longer a covenant. It is a consumer product. If the product no longer makes you feel the way you want to feel, the narrative dictates that you should return it for a refund. A vital case study in this linguistic takeover is the evolution of the therapist character on American television. In the mid-20th century, therapists were often portrayed as quirky outsiders or villains trying to brainwash the protagonist. By the 1990s and 2000s, with shows like The Sopranos or In Treatment, the therapist became the moral compass of the story. The therapy session became the place where the divorce now narrative was forged. The therapist's role in these scripts, often to help the protagonist realize that their partner is the source of their stagnation. This provides the viewer with a step-by-step roadmap for how to justify their own desire to leave. It teaches the audience that if you can articulate your unhappiness in clinical terms, you are exempt from the moral consequences of breaking a vow. The step-by-step weaponization of therapy speak follows a consistent pattern in modern screenwriting. Step 1. The pathologizing of the partner. The spouse is no longer just grumpy or tired. They are emotionally unavailable or exhibiting gaslighting behaviors. By applying clinical labels to common relationship frictions, the writers make the divorce seem like a necessary health intervention. Step 2. The elevation of the individual's truth. Scripts increasingly emphasize that everyone has their own truth, which is a narrative device that eliminates the possibility of objective right or wrong. Step 3. The redefinition of betrayal. In the traditional script, betrayal was an action like infidelity. In the therapeutic script, staying in a marriage that doesn't feel right is framed as a betrayal of the self, which is portrayed as the ultimate sin. This shift has profound potential outcomes for how the U.S. public views long-term stability. Historical trends suggest that when a society prioritizes subjective feelings over objective commitments, the institutions that rely on stability, such as the family, begin to fracture. Television doesn't just reflect this, it accelerates it. By providing a constant stream of stories where the protagonist finds happiness only after rejecting their domestic responsibilities, the media creates a cultural blueprint where walking away is the only path to authenticity. The screen teaches us that the version of ourselves that exists within a marriage is a false or suppressed version, and the version that exists after the divorce is the real one. Consider the role of the midlife crisis narrative. Historically, this was a trope used for comedy, often involving a man buying a sports car. In 2026, the midlife crisis is rebranded as a spiritual awakening. Shows like Eat, Pray, Love or more modern episodic equivalents frame the abandonment of a life as a courageous quest for meaning. This narrative focuses exclusively on the protagonist's internal journey, carefully cropped to exclude the wreckage left behind. The data of television consumption shows that these stories are particularly popular among demographics experiencing high levels of burnout. The divorce now narrative is sold as a reset button for a life that has become too complicated or too demanding. We must also analyze the case study of the narcissism trope. In recent years, the word narcissist has become a ubiquitous term in television scripts to describe an unsatisfactory partner. By labeling a spouse a narcissist, the writer effectively removes their humanity and grants the protagonist a moral hall pass to leave. This is a powerful tool for maintaining high retention. It creates a clear hero and a clear villain. However, the real-world application of this trope is devastating. It encourages viewers to view their partners through a lens of pathology rather than partnership. If you can convince yourself that your spouse has a personality disorder, you don't have to do the hard work of communication or compromise. The financial infrastructure of 2026 also plays into this subjective reality. Digital platforms thrive on the quantification of feelings. Likes, shares, and engagement are the currencies of the era. The divorce now narrative fits perfectly into this world because it is highly shareable and emotionally volatile. A story about a woman leaving her husband to start a nomadic lifestyle in a van generates thousands of comments about her bravery and strength. A story about a couple quietly working through 20 years of boredom and raising 3 children doesn't go viral. The industry is biased toward the explosive, the sudden, and the individualistic because that is what the algorithms are designed to promote. The pacing of the therapeutic narrative is also a form of manipulation. Real psychological growth is slow, painful, and often involves taking responsibility for one's own failures. Television therapy is fast. In a 40-minute episode, a character has an epiphany, confronts their partner with a perfectly composed speech, and packs their bags. This gives the audience a false expectation of how emotional transitions work. It makes the divorce look like a clean surgical strike, rather than the messy, multi-year, emotionally draining process it actually is. It sells the breakthrough without showing the breakdown. In 2026, we see the emergence of the post-truth relationship. This is a state where the history of a marriage is rewritten in the mind of the protagonist to justify their current desire to leave. Television uses flashbacks to facilitate this. A memory that was previously shown as happy is replayed with a darker musical score, or a different camera angle to show that the husband was actually being controlling, or the wife was secretly miserable. This teaches the viewer that their own past is a draft that can be edited to fit their current emotional needs. It undermines the idea of shared history, which is the foundation of any long-term union. But what happens when this obsession with the self meets the hard reality of social isolation? As the divorce now narrative continues to dominate the American screen, we are seeing a parallel rise in the epidemic of loneliness. We have been told that we are the main characters of our own movies, but we are finding out that a movie with only one character is a very lonely experience. In the next part, we are going to look at the great American loneliness and how television is attempting to sell us the solution to a problem it helped create. We will explore the rise of the chosen family and the virtual community as a replacement for the nuclear unit. Is the screen trying to fill the void it left when it convinced us to walk away? The intersection of technology and the broken home is where the next stage of the American script begins. The great American loneliness is not a bug in the system. It is a feature of the modern domestic narrative. As we move deeper into 2026, we are beginning to see the unintended consequences of 5 decades of the Divorce Now script. Television has successfully dismantled the nuclear family as the primary unit of stability, but in its place, it has left a massive emotional vacuum. To address this, the media industry has developed a new narrative tool, the chosen family. This is the idea that the biological and marital ties that failed you can be replaced by a curated circle of friends, co-workers, and digital connections. While this is framed as a liberating evolution, a closer look at the data and the historical trends suggests it is actually a strategic pivot to keep individuals tethered to their screens and their consumer habits. Imagine a character named Thomas. Thomas followed the script perfectly. In his early 30s, he realized his marriage was no longer providing the high-octane emotional fulfillment he saw in his favorite streaming dramas. He opted for a clean break, believing that his true self was waiting on the other side. But in 2026, Thomas finds himself in a sleek apartment, surrounded by the high-end gadgets the advertisements suggested he buy, yet experiencing a profound sense of isolation. The television response to Thomas's situation is not to suggest reconciliation or the hard work of community building. It is to offer him a new show about a group of single friends who are always available, always witty, and always together. This is the Friends effect taken to a pathological extreme. It sells the viewer a virtual social life to replace the real one they were encouraged to leave. A significant case study in this trend is the rise of the workplace's family genre. Shows like The Office, Parks and Recreation, and more recently corporate dramas on major platforms, have spent years convincing the US public that your colleagues are your true tribe. By framing the office as the site of your most meaningful relationships and your deepest personal growth, the media prepares the individual to accept a life where work is the only stable anchor. This is particularly profitable for the corporate architecture we discussed earlier. If an individual views their workplace as their family, they are more likely to work longer hours, accept less work-life balance, and derive their entire identity from their professional output. The Divorce Now narrative facilitates this by removing the competing loyalty of the home. The step-by-step implementation of the chosen family narrative follows a predictable path. Step 1. The portrayal of biological or marital family as inherently toxic or stifling. In 2026, the trope of the overbearing mother or the boring spouse is used as a foil for the cool, supportive best friend. Step 2. The glamorization of the urban tribe. The narrative focuses on the brunches, the shared crises, and the lack of domestic responsibility. Step 3. The introduction of technology as the glue. Shows now feature characters who are constantly in group chats, using the screen to maintain a sense of presence that isn't physically there. This creates a potential outcome where the viewer feels they are part of a community, while they are actually sitting alone in a dark room. We must also analyze the historical trends of the single-person household in relation to media consumption. Data from 2026 indicates that individuals living alone spend significantly more time engaging with digital content than those living in family units. When you have no one to talk to at the dinner table, the television becomes your primary conversational partner. The industry knows this. The more isolated the population becomes, the more dependent they are on the narrative of the now to provide them with a sense of social reality. The Divorce Now narrative is a primary driver of this isolation. By encouraging the split, the media manufactures a lonely consumer, who is then sold a digital subscription to cure that loneliness. Consider the role of reality television as a surrogate for community. The Real Housewives or various dating competition shows provide the viewer with a sense of intimacy and social stakes. You aren't just watching a show. You are participating in a parasocial relationship. For someone like Thomas, these characters become more familiar than his own neighbors. The media uses high retention techniques, the cliffhanger, the social media feud, the behind-the-scenes leak, to keep the viewer emotionally invested in these fictionalized lives. This is a case study in how the screen fills the void left by the destruction of the family. It provides a low-stakes, high-reward version of intimacy that requires no sacrifice and no long-term commitment. The technology of 2026 has even introduced the AI companion narrative. We are starting to see scripts where the protagonist finds more emotional resonance with an artificial intelligence than with a human partner. Shows are exploring the potential outcomes of a society where we can program our perfect companion. Someone who never disagrees, never ages, and never leaves. This is the logical conclusion of the therapeutic narrative we explored in Part 7. If the goal of life is the maintenance of a positive internal state, then a programmable AI is a much more efficient tool than a complicated, autonomous human spouse. The Divorce Now narrative is the necessary precursor to this technological shift. You have to believe that human relationships are inherently flawed and disposable before you will accept a digital replacement. There is also a fascinating economic reality to the chosen family. Traditional families are difficult to monetize because they tend to share resources. A chosen family, however, is a collection of individual consumers. When a group of friends on a show goes on a trip, they are using individual credit cards, staying in separate rooms, and buying separate outfits. The marketing data shows that the urban tribe is a much more lucrative demographic for the travel and hospitality industry than the family with 3 kids looking for a discount package. The media promotes the lifestyle that generates the most economic activity, regardless of its long-term social sustainability. Pacing is also crucial here. In the chosen family narrative, conflict is resolved quickly and usually results in a deeper bond. This is a fantasy version of human interaction. In real life, friendships are often fragile and can dissolve over minor disagreements or life changes like moving or changing jobs. By presenting the chosen family as a more stable and rewarding alternative to marriage, television gives the US public a false sense of security. It tells the viewer that if they leave their spouse, a group of loyal, fascinating friends will magically appear to catch them. The reality, as many find out too late, is that building a lifelong support system from scratch in your 40s or 50s is an incredibly difficult task. As we look at the historical trends of the American script, we see a move toward the atomization of society. We are being broken down into individual data points, easier to predict and easier to sell to. The divorce now narrative was the first step in this process. By breaking the most fundamental bond, the industry opened the door to a world where every relationship is a temporary alliance based on current mutual benefit. This is the era of the liquid relationship, and television is the fluid that carries it into every home in America. But as we reach the end of this part, we have to look at the one thing the media can't fully control: the biological clock and the human desire for legacy. Even in 2026, people still feel the pull of the future. How does the television industry handle the natural urge for continuity and children in a world where it has made the family unit look like a prison? In the next part, we are going to dive into the rise of the solo parent narrative and the commodification of the next generation. We will look at how the industry is rebranding the act of having children as a solo adventure project, further separating the concept of parenting from the concept of partnership. How do you sell a baby to a single consumer? The answer is more calculated than you think. The commodification of the next generation within the divorce now narrative is the final frontier of individualistic marketing. In 2026, the American entertainment industry has perfected a new archetype: the solo parent by choice. This is a narrative shift that effectively delinks the act of child-rearing from the institution of marriage, framing a child not as the fruit of a lifelong partnership, but as the ultimate accessory to a self-actualized life. To sell a baby to a single consumer, the media must first rebrand the traditional two-parent home as an inefficient or even obsolete model. By doing so, they unlock a massive new market of solo-driven consumption that spans from fertility technology to specialized single-parent luxury services. Imagine a character named Jessica. In the year 2026, Jessica is portrayed as a high-powered executive who has decided she does not need a partner to complete her journey toward motherhood. On her television screen, she sees protagonists who use fertility apps and modern medical intervention as a step-by-step path to an independent family. The narrative focuses on her agency, her financial readiness, and her curated nursery. It intentionally omits the historical trends regarding the immense difficulty of balancing a 24-hour career with the demands of an infant without a second pair of hands in the house. This is the solo adventure project. By framing a child as a personal milestone rather than a shared legacy, television makes the absence of a spouse look like a strategic advantage rather than a significant challenge. A profound case study in this narrative pivot can be seen in the evolution of how fertility and reproductive technology are depicted in prestige dramas. Historically, these topics were handled with a sense of tragedy or medical sterility. Today, shows like The New Normal or contemporary streaming series frame the process as a consumerist triumph. The search for the perfect donor or surrogate is shot like a high-end shopping experience. This serves a dual purpose. First, it normalizes the idea that a family can be purchased and assembled piecemeal. Second, it reinforces the divorce now narrative by suggesting that if a relationship fails, or if one never starts, the individual has lost nothing in terms of their ability to have a family. The message is clear. The partner is optional, but the child is a product you can still acquire. The step-by-step logic of the solo parent script follows a very specific financial and social trajectory. Step 1. Establish the protagonist's total independence. The show emphasizes their success, their apartment, and their lack of a need for compromise. Step 2. Introduce the biological urge as a solo quest. The narrative treats the desire for a child like a desire for a promotion, something to be achieved through planning and investment. Step 3. Minimize the role of the other parent or donor. They are often portrayed as a mere biological necessity or a distant, non-intrusive figure. This ensures that the viewer sees the child as belonging exclusively to the protagonist, reinforcing the idea of the child as an extension of the self, rather than a member of a broader family unit. We must also look at the historical trends of the parenting industry in the United States. In 2026, data shows that single parents by choice represent one of the highest spending demographics in the baby care sector. Because they lack a partner to share the load, they are more reliant on paid services, night nurses, specialized daycare, meal delivery, and educational apps. For the corporate entities that fund television, the solo parent is a far more profitable target than the traditional couple who might rely on each other or extended family for support. The media promotes the solo parent lifestyle because it forces the individual to replace human support with commercial products. Consider the role of the influencer parent in reality television and social media integrations. These characters often present a highly stylized version of single parenthood, where the house is always clean and the child is always dressed in coordinated outfits. This creates a potential outcome where the US public begins to believe that the friction of a two-parent household, the arguments over discipline, the negotiation of chores, is a burden that can be avoided by simply going it alone. The screen sells the silence of the solo home as peace, rather than what it often is: a lack of collaborative input. The divorce now narrative wins again by suggesting that the most efficient way to parent is to have no one to disagree with. This leads us to the case study of the teen protagonist in solo parent shows. In these stories, the child is often written as the protagonist's best friend. This is a common trope where the boundaries between parent and child are blurred to create a sense of camaraderie. While this makes for great television and witty dialogue, it ignores the data regarding the importance of parental hierarchy and the developmental need for children to be children, not emotional anchors for their parents. The media glamorizes the single-parent-child duo as a team against the world, but this narrative is often used to justify the initial divorce or the decision to parent alone, suggesting that the child is actually better off with one devoted parent than two who might struggle to get along. Furthermore, the advertising ecosystem in 2026 has adapted to this shift. Commercials during these shows often feature single parents using smart home technology to monitor their children while they work. The technology is presented as a surrogate for the missing partner. The potential outcomes of this are a society where we believe that high-speed internet and cameras can replace the presence of a second caregiver. The media industry is effectively selling the tools of the divorce now lifestyle as a modern, high-tech upgrade to the traditional family. The pacing of the solo parent narrative is also deceptive. A 30-minute sitcom can show the fun parts of parenting, the cute moments at the park, the bedtime stories, without showing the cumulative exhaustion of the 3 a.m. fever when there is no one else to take the next shift. By editing out the physical and emotional toll of doing it all alone, the script makes the solo adventure project look like a sustainable long-term choice. It presents the beginning of the journey with great fanfare, but rarely shows the long-term historical trends of parent burnout that occur 5 or 10 years down the line. As we examine the current year 2026, we see that the American script has successfully rebranded the family as a collection of individuals with shared living space, rather than a cohesive unit with a shared destiny. The child has been integrated into the divorce now narrative as a way to prove that the individual can have it all without the messy, difficult, and often boring work of maintaining a marriage. We are taught that loyalty to the self is the highest virtue, and that children are resilient enough to adapt to whatever configuration the adult chooses. But what is the final destination of this narrative path? If we have dismantled the marriage, villainized the spouse, sanitized the impact on children, and turned parenting into a solo commercial venture, what is left of the American social fabric? In the final part of this masterclass, we are going to look at the great narrative correction. Is there a point where the human cost becomes too high for the media to ignore? We will explore the emerging counter-narratives of the late 2020s, the shows that are starting to experiment with the idea of radical commitment and the return to the long haul. Is the divorce now narrative finally reaching its saturation point? Or is the industry preparing an even more radical deconstruction of the human bond? The ending of this story is being written right now, and the stakes involve the very future of how we define love. The intersection of media-saturated living and the actual lived experience of the American public in 2026 has brought us to a cultural crossroads. For 9 parts of this masterclass, we have deconstructed the mechanics of the divorce now narrative, the financial incentives, the psychological reframing, and the surgical precision with which the entertainment industry has separated the individual from the institution of marriage. But as we enter this final chapter, we must look at the emerging historical trends of the late 2020s. We are starting to see the first signs of a narrative correction. Just as the 1970s reacted to the forced perfection of the 1950s, the audience of today is beginning to react to the forced fragmentation of the last 20 years. People are waking up to the reality that while the screen sold them liberation, the shelf life of that liberation is often shorter than the length of a streaming contract. Imagine a character named Christopher. Christopher has spent his entire adult life consuming the Divorce Now script. He watched the prestige dramas where the protagonist finds their soul in a post-marital glow-up. He followed the influencers who celebrated their conscious uncoupling with high production value photo shoots. By the time he reached 2026, He had successfully navigated 2 major relationships using the exit strategy model. But Christopher is beginning to notice a new kind of content appearing in his feed. He is seeing stories that don't end at the breakup, but rather explore the grueling, beautiful, and deeply human potential outcomes of staying. He is seeing a shift from the aesthetic of the new to the aesthetic of the durable. This is the beginning of the radical commitment era, and it is the industry's response to a market that is increasingly exhausted by its economy. A vital case study in this correction can be found in the recent pivot of major streaming platforms toward legacy-building narratives. After a decade of celebrating the disruptor, showrunners are experimenting with scripts that treat long-term endurance as the ultimate plot twist. These shows don't portray marriage as a 1950s sitcom. They portray it as a high-stakes, long-form survival epic. They are using the same high-retention techniques that made the Divorce Now narrative viral: the tension, the secrets, the dramatic confrontations, but they are applying them to the process of reconciliation. In these 2026 scripts, the hero isn't the one who leaves. The hero is the one who does the unglamorous step-by-step work of rebuilding what was broken. This is a strategic move by networks to tap into a growing sense of nostalgia for stability among younger demographics who grew up in the ruins of the fractured family era. Let us look at the step-by-step mechanics of how the media is rebranding commitment. Step 1. The admission of the cost. Unlike the Divorce Now scripts that hid the financial and emotional wreckage, these new narratives lean into the pain. They show the data of the isolation. They show the character staring at the empty side of the bed not with a sense of freedom, but with a sense of profound loss. Step 2. The deglamorization of the single market. Television is starting to show the dating app cycle not as an endless buffet of choice, but as a repetitive, commodified loop that offers high stimulation but low nourishment. Step 3. The elevation of shared history. Writers are using nonlinear storytelling to show that the years spent with a partner are a form of wealth that cannot be liquidated or replaced. By framing the length of a relationship as its own reward, the media is creating a new aspirational standard for the American public. However, we must remain critical of the industry's motives. The corporate architecture that profited from the split has not suddenly developed a moral conscience. Rather, they have identified a new market segment: the loneliness economy. As the historical trends of isolation reach a boiling point, the media is selling the cure to the disease it helped spread. If the 2010s were about selling you the tools to be alone, the late 2020s are about selling you the fantasy of belonging. This involves a new wave of products: multi-user home systems, communal living developments, and family-oriented digital platforms. The narrative of the now is shifting because the consumer of the now is desperate for the then. Consider the role of the United States character named Sarah once more. In 2026, Sarah is part of a generation that is witnessing the gray divorce phenomenon in her own parents. She sees the potential outcomes of a life spent prioritizing the self over the bond: a quiet house, a fragmented social circle, and a reliance on professional caregivers. Sarah's generation is starting to demand stories that offer a roadmap for something different. This has led to the rise of the intergenerational drama, where the plot focuses on the repair of the family tree rather than its pruning. These shows are case studies in how to navigate the complex legal and financial realities of 2026 while maintaining a commitment to the collective. They are teaching a new set of skills: negotiation, forgiveness, and the delayed gratification of building something that outlasts the individual. The data behind this shift is compelling. High retention metrics for shows that feature successful, long-term partnerships are on the rise for the first time in 30 years. The US public is increasingly gravitating toward content that provides a sense of continuity. Advertisers are following suit. We are seeing a move away from ads that focus on the independent, solo traveler, and a return to ads that focus on the multi-generational gathering. The industry is pivoting because it has realized that the single consumer, while aggressive, is also highly volatile and expensive to retain. The committed consumer, however, provides a stable long-term base for brand loyalty. The Divorce Now narrative was a sprint, the commitment narrative is a marathon, and the boardrooms are preparing for the long haul. But we must ask, is this correction authentic? Or is it just another script? The pacing of these new commitment stories is still dictated by the requirements of television. They often make reconciliation look faster and easier than it is in reality. They skip the years of therapy and the 1,000 small decisions to stay, and jump straight to the emotional climax of the vow renewal. The danger remains that the media is simply swapping one unattainable fantasy for another. Just as the Divorce Now narrative made the split look too easy, The new commitment narrative might make the repair look too certain. As we conclude this 10-part deep dive, the final historical trend to monitor is the fusion of technology and tradition. We are seeing the emergence of the transparent marriage on screen, where characters use digital tools not to facilitate an affair or a secret exit, but to build radical honesty. This is the 2026 version of the American dream. A high-tech, high-transparency, high-commitment union. It is a reaction to the era of the secret bank account and the hidden dating profile. Whether this narrative can truly take root in a culture that has been conditioned for 50 years to walk away is the great unanswered question of our time. The divorce now narrative hasn't disappeared. It has simply become one of many competing scripts. But for the first time in the history of American television, it is being challenged by a narrative that values the bond as much as the individual. You are no longer just a spectator in this process. You are the target of every frame and every line of dialogue. By understanding the history of how your domestic expectations were engineered, you gain the agency to write your own script. The masterclass is over, but the real deep dive, the one that happens in your own home, away from the glow of the screen, is just beginning. The loops are closing, the credits are starting to roll. But the question of how we define love in the digital age remains the ultimate open loop. How will you choose to finish the story?